All right, our next presenter, Dani Collier, is a Minnesota master naturalist, a part-time naturalist at both Carpenter Nature Center and Wood Lake Nature Center, and she's a lifelong lover of birds. Her foray into feeding the birds started 15 years ago with a simple feeder and a bag of seed from the local hardware store. After her time working at a local bird feed store, she has since added multiple feeder types, seed types, and bird baths. Her love for birds also extends to a love for insects and native plants alike, which she has started to incorporate into her bird feeding tactics at her Bloomington home. When she isn't watching the birds at home, you can find her birding at Old Cedar Avenue Bridge, Wood Lake Nature Center, and Sax-Zim Bog. And I see you're on, Dani, and you can
Hi,
go ahead and share whenever you're ready. Thank you for being our next presenter.
thank you, Jen. Let me just give me 1 second here.
And then just following up, so y'all know, Randy and I are still researching to see if the number of permit holders in banding has increased or decreased through the years, and we haven't found that yet, but um, looks like the share is going ahead, and I'll tell you when I can see it fully on
Oh,
this side.
whoops. Sorry, I was reviewing things.
There we go. It is looking beautiful, Dani. We can see your slide, and I will mute and go off camera.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen. All right. My presentation today is about starting your own bird B&B or your own bird bed and breakfast. Um, it's something that I've really enjoyed doing, and I thought it'd be fun to share with others. So, why a bird B&B? Um, so a couple of things on the left-hand side. Um, Putting feeders into your backyard or on your balcony. There are a lot of reasons why people might want to do that. There are a lot of studies that have come out about how watching birds, listening to birds, especially in the comfort of your own home, is really great for your mental health, and even your physical health, especially if you're out there changing your feeders and watching your birds just out in the fresh air. Folks wanting to feel a connection to nature is another reason why you might want to do a backyard bird B&B. I think the pandemic definitely increased the amount of birders in the world. Um, when you're stuck inside all day, being able to go outside, being able to look out your window at the creatures outside is really a great way to feel still connected to the world. It's also a way to help our declining bird populations. A lot of birds do fly over. I live in Bloomington, so I'm kind of in uh, urban, suburban-y area, pretty close to Old Cedar Avenue Bridge, which is um, one of the top birding spots, I believe, in the state of Minnesota even. Um, and so giving them water, giving them, a little pick me up, especially if they're going to continue migrating north, is a great way to kind of feel like you're also helping the birds, especially if you're somebody who's busy or somebody who maybe doesn't feel like they have a background to be able to go out and do all the fun science stuff. And then that leads on to citizen science. You might be somebody who just really got into iNaturalist, really got into eBird, and wanting to be able to do that in your own yard. I think is a big pull for people. I know I love being able to keep track of the different birds I see in my yard. And also just because birds are awesome. Um, it's always fun to be able to get to see birds. Actually, while I was listening to everybody present, I saw a male goldfinch at my one of my bird baths, and he was in full yellow. Uh, so that brought a smile to my face during this kind of rainy day. So when I'm first planning out like a new feeder nest box setup in a new home, the reason why I like to talk about it being like a bird B&B or bed and breakfast, because birds, kind of similar to humans in a way, are looking for very specific things when they're looking for food, when they're looking for shelter, when they're looking for um, nesting areas, just like how if you're taking a trip somewhere, you want to know if you're close to public transportation or if you're close to a lot of good food places. So I think especially for people who are newer to backyard bird feeding, it's a nice way to kind of connect those ideas, and helps you kind of consider the bird in the way that you would even consider yourself and your own family. So, with that, we're going to check out the different important things that a bird would be looking for if they were going to be checking into your bird B&B, excuse me. Okay, so the first thing is think like a bird. It's like what I like to say. So birds are going to have really specific things that they're looking for. Um, they're going to come down to your backyard or maybe even your balcony, and they're going to be like, does this place have the types of food that I need? If you're a hummingbird and you stop by and there's no nectar or native plants that they can use, that hummingbird may very well just continue on because it doesn't have the food source it needs. Is there a clean water source here? There are a lot of birds that will stop not at your feeders, but at your water. And if they see that there's not a water source there, or it's really yucky, it's got a lot of, you know, bird droppings in it, they may continue going on. Am I safe from predators? Are there places to hide? If you have a very open, flat monoculture yard with no trees or bushes, shrubs, things like that, birds are likely to not want to stick around because there's a lot of predators, both bird predators, people who let their cats outside, um, even humans in a way. They're not going to feel safe. Just like how you're kind of looking around, like, do I have a lock on my door? Are there places that I can, get in out of the rain when you're going and looking for a place to stay? Um, Birds also consider those things. And then, are there too many birds competing for resources? I don't know if anybody's ever gone into a mall or been on a beach and it's just shoulder to shoulder people, and you're just like, I gotta get out of here. There's too many people here. I'm not gonna be able to get what I want, whether it's a spot or food. Maybe there's like a super long line at a food truck. If there are not enough feeders out there, or there's just too many birds competing for the resources, um, some of those bird species may move on because it's just not something that, calls back to being safe for them. And they don't want to have to put their energy into competing for resources when it's not necessary that they're gonna necessarily gonna get them. And then last, birds are gonna come in here and they're gonna kind of basically incorporate all of the above check boxes. Does this place have what I need to raise my young here? Does it have food that I can give my young? Is there clean water for when they are flying around and they need to stop for a drink, or when the fledglings fledge and maybe they need to drink or they need to take a bath, things like that. Are they safe from predators? You don't want to raise your young in a place where the neighborhood cat could come and take you out, or there's squirrels coming around trying to grab the eggs from an improper nest box, so on and so forth. So when you're starting out, especially if you're new or if you're moving into a new home, I encourage people to think like a bird and consider the different environment that their yard or apartment, townhome, so forth, has for those creatures that you're kind of trying to entice so that you can watch them or listen to them. So this is a heavy slide. There's a lot here. But these are really important elements to your bird B&B. Food, water, and feeders. So when we consider food, I know when people think of bird food or bird, seed is the first thing that comes to mind, those big packs of seed or big barrels full of seed at the various hardware stores or specialty bird stores in town. Uh, we think of black Oilers, we think of Niger. Um, so a lot of folks will think about peanuts, but there are different various different types of seeds that provide different benefits for different birds. Um, I kind of liked in the beginning when Rob talked about how birding is a little bit like being a Sherlock. Um, in that way, creating a bird B&B is like that too, where it's a lot of observation, knowing the bird species that are coming to your yard, um, and knowing all the little bits and pieces to be able to create that kind of five-star um, area for your birds. So no mess versus mess. When I worked at All Season Wild Bird Store, this was a big question from folks. So a lot of people don't care about having mess. So black oil sunflower seeds are great for birds. They are in the shell still when you get them, and the birds break them open, they eat the seed that's inside, and they go about their merry way. But because that shell falls down onto the ground, it's acidic in nature, it can turn your soil acidic, it can create a lot of mess. Not everybody likes that option, especially if you're somebody who's staying in a townhome or an apartment. When I first came to the cities, we were in a townhome and it created a lot of mess. And I was always a little nervous that our landlord was going to come and tell me I had to stop feeding the birds. Because I do plant a lot of plants in my yard, I no longer use seeds that produce mess. One, because some of them, like I said, can create acidic soil underneath them. Um, they can grow from seed. And if it's not a native plant, I don't necessarily want it in my yard. So that's something that's really have to consider. The benefits of no mess obviously is no mess. Um, Birds don't have a hard time getting into any of the seeds because it's been taken out. Um, but the con there is that no mess mixes or no mess seeds are tend to be a little bit more expensive. So if you're looking for a more frugal option, especially if you want to have a lot of feeders, sometimes having seeds that are still in their shell or their hull is the way to go. So, and then that also connects to protein and fat versus filler seed. So you really want to be feeding your birds seed that has a lot of protein and fat versus seed mixes that have just a ton of millet or other like filler seeds that don't really give them the nutritional content. So it's important to consider um, what you're feeding your birds, especially when they're just getting back from migration or they're taking off and they're going to be migrating south, or even during the winter time when things are cold, giving them food that has a lot of protein and fat versus just the kind of filler feed is important to the health of the bird if that's something that you're considering, which I encourage you to consider. And then specialty foods. There's a lot of other foods out there besides just our seeds. There's suet, which I love. I'm a big fan of suet. I have almost every woodpecker species has shown up in my yard, um, and they love their suet. I have several red-breasted nuthatches right now that go to town on the suet. The only warbler that I've ever had at a feeder has been on a mealworm suet cake, yellow rumped warbler. So you have your nectars, you have your, grape jellies, those kind of things that aren't your typical seed foods, but can be really beneficial. Putting out mealworms, especially in the beginning of spring, is a really great way again to give birds protein. Um, and they do love mealworms, especially your robins and your bluebirds. The only time I've really ever seen bluebirds stop by my yard is when I was putting out a heavy amount of live mealworms. Again, the trade-off there is that they can be spendy. Um, so if you're a gardener and you don't want the invasive earthworms, you can just throw them in your feeders and the birds will peck at them for you. When I worked at the seed store, we had just a couple common seed complaints that I think folks just need to think about. Um, the two that were like the biggest one was the Niger seed. People would always come back and be like, my finches aren't eating my Niger seed. Why aren't they eating my Niger? And you'd be like, well, how old is your Niger? And have you had it outside during rainy weather? And 9 times out of 10, it was always, yes, I've had it outside during bad weather. Um, if Niger gets wet, it goes bad. like within a day. So be really careful if you're using that food source for birds, that it's in a place in a feeder that keeps it dry, um, isn't going to have any moisture trapped in it. If it does get wet, that you're dumping it out, cleaning it out right away, and putting fresh seed in there because you don't want to make your birds sick. Um, Another common seed complaint that we would get is that there were moths in their feed. We would have people come back and try to like be like, oh, well, there's moths in this seed. I can't feed my birds this. Birds love moths. They love worms, moth caterpillars. Um, so I encourage folks, if you do see that, it's good to put your seed in a really like a cold place, because that helps keep the insects that, feeder moths that are just going to be in there and more than just bird seed, even our own human seed. It's something that we've been dealing with for decades. Um, so don't worry if you see worms or feeder moths in your seed. It doesn't mean that your seed has gone bad. It just means that the conditions were right for that larva to pupate and become a moth. So you can just put your seed outside in a nice airtight container, freeze your seed when you get it in, um, and just make sure you're not allowing those things out in your home. But the birds will eat the worms, the moths, so you don't have to worry about them being picky. They will enjoy that. And the other thing is the best food during nesting. So, one of the main reasons that I started to put native plants out in my yard, and I recognize it's not something that everybody can do, especially if you're somebody who's just like a balcony birder. But native plants provide the habitat birds need, um, for a number of reasons, but also because it provides habitat and food for caterpillars. Moth caterpillars specifically are like 90% of a baby songbird's diet. So adult birds, they're not necessarily going to be eating the seed and then giving that to their baby birds. They're going to be feeding them those big, what I have read online, people have called the caterpillars nature's hot dog. Um, and they're full of protein. Um, they're definitely more of an organic hot dog because they have a lot of great things that the birds, baby birds need to be able to grow up successfully. So if you're really wanting to provide the best food during nesting season, you're going to want to plant different native plants that support um, caterpillar species so that your baby birds uh, have the food that they need. Um, so I'll move on to water. Water brings 3 times more birds to your yard than seed will. If you can do anything in your yard, put a water source out. Every bird needs water. Um, Most birds need water. If you're a chimney swift and you never have to land, that's different. But a lot of birds are gonna stop at your water source that you'll never get at your feeders. You're gonna have different warbler species. Um, you might even have different thrush species that visit. It's really fun watching them in the morning, drinking or bathing. They are going to prefer a water source that has a bubbler or a moving like fountain, because moving water generally means cleaner water than something that's just still. But still water that's cleaned regularly is still better than no water at all. And there are winter options. I switch out my bird baths during winter to a heated bird bath. And it's so much fun to watch juncos, chickadees taking like a morning bath, coming in big groups to drink. So I really, really suggest that if you're starting and you don't want to have to invest in a bunch of feeders and seed, put water out and just start noting what's coming to your water because then you'll be able to kind of write down what kind of seed you may want to put out in the future. And then we get to feeders, cheap versus spendy. The first feeder I ever bought was a feeder from a hardware store when I lived in Fargo, North Dakota, 15 years ago. And it was like maybe $10 and just kind of a cheap bag of seed. I didn't really know anything. I just knew that I liked birds. I had a house finally, and I wanted to try to bring birds to the yard. I think the first flock of birds I got was just a bunch of common grackles, and I loved every minute of it. They were so fun to watch, and I didn't have to spend a lot to bring birds to my yard, to bring joy to my life. So looking at different brands, there are going to be spendier versions that, something like a squirrel buster that can help you in deterring squirrels. That could be worth the money, but I would say, especially if you're new to backyard bird feeding, don't go all in on like super expensive feeders right away until you kind of understand the dynamic in your yard. Materials are also an important thing to think about. Um, the materials that are made out of plastics, like hard composite, they're going to be more expensive than your materials that are made out of just wood. The wood will be cheaper, but it also will degrade quicker. So that's something to consider. Um, Anything that ever says it's squirrel proof is lying to you. Nothing is squirrel proof. Um, Things might be squirrel resistant. Uh, I love my squirrel buster feeders. Highly recommend them if you're somebody who has a lot of issues with squirrels. And they also have a lifetime warranty. So if something breaks because of the squirrel, you can go into a local area, local bird feed shop that has squirrel buster products, and they will place parts for you. That's kind of like the vortex of the bird feeding world in that sense, where you can just bring your stuff in and they fix it for you. Cleaning your feeders is one of the most important thing that you can do. If you can't dedicate time to cleaning your feeders, then you probably should not be putting out as much food because it can really promote a lot of disease and things among birds. If you've ever seen a house finch with conjunctivitis, that can spread really quickly. So making sure that you're properly cleaning your bird feeders is very important. So that's another thing to consider when you're kind of creating your bird B&B is how much effort do I really want to put in? Are you going to get a feeder that has all these nooks and crannies, or are you just going to do a platform feeder that's really easy to clean? That's something that I feel like people, they're just excited to start feeding birds and they don't consider the kind of legwork that goes into cleaning their feeders. And that can really set them back sometimes. And then the last thing is what people like to call nuisance birds. Um, I am a huge fan of corvids, and so I am uh, not on the bandwagon of wanting to take all my feeders down because there's a bunch of grackles or red-winged blackbirds or blue jays. I welcome all birds in my feeders. If I get like a huge house sparrow group coming in, I might take my feeders down for a little bit to kind of encourage them to move along. Um, but otherwise, it really is up to you what you feel is a nuisance bird, what you're really trying to get out of doing a backyard bird B&B. Um, but I encourage people to think about why they find a bird to be a nuisance bird and kind of reflect on, is it because I don't want to spend a lot of money on the feed? Is it because I don't like the way those birds seem to be bullying other birds? And maybe looking into why those birds behave that way. Because sometimes learning the behavior of a bird can kind of help clear the air a little bit about how it's not really a bully bird or a nuisance bird. It's just a bird being its bird self. So, that to be said, when to feed the birds? All year, just winter, different strokes for different folks. So, I personally mainly just feed birds in the winter and then right in the beginning of spring and the tail end of summer into fall when birds are migrating. Mostly because I have so many native plants in my yard and I want to encourage the birds to eat all the caterpillars that I have. But that's not to say that that's what you want to do. So just kind of consider the different things, the cost that goes into feeding all year, versus in just certain time periods. Are you going to be home? Are you going to be gone on vacation? It really is up to you, but it is something that I think people should research before they go all in, because sometimes it can get to be a little crazy when you're trying to feed birds all year, or even if you're just trying to feed them in the winter, if you're somebody who can't kind of stop through the snow, thinking about maybe just doing a bird bath versus feeders in the winter, is important. Kind of having a game plan. Okay, that was a lot. We're gonna move on to nesting boxes and roosts. So one of the biggest things I got when I worked at All Seasons was people coming in like December, being like, the birds aren't using my birdhouse. I'm like, they're they're probably some birds do during winter use birdhouses or roosts as a roost. But for the most part, birds are going to use a nest or a nesting box, what folks call birdhouses, when they are nesting, when they're breeding. And so not every bird, especially if you maybe are just starting, is going to be in your yard to nest, to have babies. They might just be flying over to get some sunflower chips and then they're going to leave. That being said, different bird species use different nest box preferences. So a lot of the bird like nesting boxes that you see out there are going to be for cavity nesting birds. Not to say that those are the only ones, it's just the ones you kind of are most prolific in different hardware stores and especially bird stores. Not every bird uses a cavity nest. If any of you have played Wingspan, you're well aware that there are different nesting types for different birds. Um, so if you're really trying to get a robin to nest in like a cavity nest, eh, it's likely that it won't try to do that because it's more likely to use like a shelf nesting box because they have their different preferences. So that's something to really, kind of going back to being a Sherlock, knowing your bird species, knowing what kind of nest they use can let you know their different nest box preferences. Um, and that kind of leads to the next point, things to consider. The entrance size. If you are trying to deter certain birds from nesting in your nest box, like maybe you just want like a red-breasted nuthatch, the entrance hole that you're going to have is going to be much smaller than it would for something like a house sparrow, which I know not nobody wants that in their nest box, but just to consider researching the kind of entrance size that your bird's going to want. Predator access. If a bird sees that there's a perch, that there's nothing to really protect it, the entrance size is too big, squirrel can get their little arm in there, or another bird can get in there and toss the eggs out. A cat could easily get up and into the nest box. Predator access, a bird's not going to want to use that. Maybe a new bird, like a bird's like their first year as a bird parent. Maybe they're still learning. For the most part, it's really important to consider predator access and how you protect that nest box from different predators that can access the parents and the babies and the eggs as well. Placement in the yard kind of calls back to those other things. Honestly, I have found birds can be weird sometimes and not want the nest box in the area that seems the most prominent for them. But then I can have it right near my front door for some reason, and they're just like, yeah, I want to be here. Uh, Birds, they have their own personalities in that sense. But it is important to consider your placement in yard. A bluebird is probably not going to get into like nest in your nest box if it's a bluebird box amongst thick brush. So researching your birds and what they like when they're nesting is important. And then material as well. Um, I think that white oak and eastern or western red cedar is the best kind of material if you're going to build a box from scratch, personally. It's got a lot of insulation benefits. It's going to last a long time in various weather conditions. Some people like composite. nest boxes. There's pros and cons for each thing, so doing that research is really important. That being said, sometimes you can do all the research and the bird chooses what you would assume it wouldn't. Um, so just take that into account that if it doesn't work out, it's okay, because patience and observation are key. I find that I have written a lot of notes. I have done a lot of staring out my window at various parts of my yard, um, to try to learn the different behaviors. Being a part of a bird banding team has really helped me kind of understand the behaviors and things, that birds kind of want or the environments that they're in. So reading up on that, and I do have a book recommendation that I'll share at the end, that can kind of help with some of this research. And then when to clean your nest box. So some folks take their nest boxes down at the end of the year, the end of the breeding season. Some people do not. It kind of is your preference. I have had a downy woodpecker the past 3 years now roost in this just dumb little bird house that I got like 5 years ago. And so anytime I try to take it down, that downy is there and it's cheeping at me, and I'm like, okay, this is your snowbird winter vacation house. That's fine. So I will leave that birdhouse up all winter. You can see a little downy's face poking out of the hole. It's really cute. But that being said, there are specialty boxes for roosting, so birds in the wintertime can get inside that nest box and stay warm together. Um, if you're going to keep your nest boxes up, I think it's important to make sure you clean it out at the end of the season, once you know there's no more nesting birds, and just know that mice and squirrels and things, depending on the size of the nest box, especially if it's a cavity box, a cavity nest box, may take up home. So that's the thing to consider. If you do happen to see a mouse nest, be very careful when you're cleaning it. Make sure you're wearing proper gloves, face masks, because mice can carry different things that can affect humans. So, um,
Dani, sorry to interrupt, but we just have about 1 minute left.
of course we do. This is a really big topic, and I was trying to, I did have this slide here, balcony birders. I don't want to ignore folks that don't have big yards because I have been where you're at. Um, I'm just gonna pause on this for just a couple seconds so folks can take a photo if they want, or they can look at it again during the recording. But there's lots of different things to consider if you live in an apartment or if you live in a place that just has a balcony or a very small slab of concrete. Um, Avian accessories, really it's bird accessories, but I like the alliteration. There's tons of things that could up your game per se, that I highly recommend. These are just some that I kind of can't go without in my yard. Not to say this is what you need when you start, but it is something that you can gradually upgrade, as you go. Um, and then some final notes. Um, I encourage you to experiment and take notes. Not everything will work, and that's okay. I know I mentioned before, patience is key. Birds can take a long time to feel safe and comfortable in your backyard, especially different houses or feeders, depending on what you have. So just make sure that you're being patient with them. Most expensive does not necessarily mean the best out there. Don't shell out a bunch of money for a feeder that honestly is crap compared to the like $10 one at the hardware store. Maintaining feeders, this is something I wish somebody would have told me. It can be a lot of work. And sometimes taking a break, taking your feeders down, and just not doing that for a while is completely fine. The birds aren't going to starve. There are a lot of places in town and throughout the greater Minnesota that you can go and watch the birds for free. If all else fails, having a water feature is the way to go. And last but not least, I encourage everybody to make it fun. Start a yard list of the birds you're seeing, join Project Feeder Watch. If you want to report your birds via eBird for citizen scientists, tracking the phenology of when the birds arrive each year. Make it fun. Make it something you can look forward to. And the changes that happen each season, something that you can look forward to. Yeah. And here's my Q&A if you have any questions.
Thanks, Dani. There are a few questions in the chat, so if you have a few minutes to type back to people, that would be awesome.
Yes.
That was really fun and really helpful summation of a lot of good information.